This is going to be a longer video, but I wanted to share my process in drawing a spray bottle by constructing and modifying basic volumes. So a few things about this video. I'm constructing a spray bottle of Nature's Miracle Stain and Odor Remover. I'm sure other spray bottles would have worked just as well, but I was struck by the composition of this bottle in particular, so I'm using it for this demonstration. On the left side of my canvas, you'll notice a crudely constructed bottle. I drew this as an example of how constructing objects with the basic volumes alone just won't cut it sometimes. Instead, for this bottle I'm drawing now, I'm using the basic volumes as a starting point, but I'm modifying them, stretching them, tapering them, truncating them, and then combining them to create the volumes I'm after. You'll probably notice my head get in the shot a couple times. Every once in a while I needed to look at what I was drawing dead on so my lines weren't skewed, and I filmed this all in one take without editing anything out, so my head gets in the frame occasionally. You might also notice that this video is a little darker than some of the other videos. That's because I'm using a lot of construction lines in this drawing, and it's best to draw construction lines lightly so they aren't mistaken for contour lines. Because I drew them so lightly, I needed to adjust the exposure of the footage so you can see what I'm drawing. Finally, I want to define my directions. I'll be referring to volumes as deep, wide, and tall. What I mean when I say tall is obvious, but when I refer to the depth of a volume, I mean its dimension measured going back to the left vanishing point. And when I refer to its width, I'm referring to its dimension going back to the right vanishing point. Now let's talk about my process. Visually measuring the main body of the bottle, it looks like this portion of the bottle is maybe half as deep as it is wide and tall. So I'll draw my modified cube with those dimensions. At the top of the main body of this bottle is this cylinder. If I imagine the full circle, I can see that the bottom of the circle would be a little higher than halfway on my cube. Its diameter is probably about 3/4 as wide and tall. So I imagine the framer of the circle, imagine its minor axis, and I draw it in place. And I make it a cylinder by drawing two lines tangent to the edges of my circle, going back to my left vanishing point, and drawing the second circle on the opposite side of the body. Now I want to draw in the slope. To get the angle right, I'm going to drop the front edge of this bottle just a little, and connect that edge to the cylinder so the slope is tangent. To finish out the volume of this main body, I need to add a subtle curve to the left and right surfaces. To do that, I'm going to find the center on the bottom of my surface, and from that point, I'm going to extend my center line just a little on either side. This is where the peak of my curve will go. If you want to relate this volume to one of the basic volumes we've learned so far, it's like a very thin slice of a very large cylinder, but I find it easier to think about it as a surface that I've just bowed out a little. This next part is going to be a little challenging, so I'm going to take my time. I need to find out how the curve on the base of the body interacts with the curve of my cylinder and sloped surface on the top. To do that, I need to project points from the bottom curve up, and I need to project corresponding points from the top curve out, until I complete a series of tiny reference rectangles, giving me a series of points that will reveal where the two curves meet. To make this easier on myself, I draw a reference for my bottom curve a little higher on the main body, so I don't have to translate points over such a long distance. When I was first learning the skill of finding the intersection of two curves, I would draw my reference lines in red. So since that's the particular skill I need to exercise here, out of habit I switched my brush color to red. Other than that, there's no real significance to the color of my lines. These reference lines aren't really very different from any of the other reference lines I'm drawing. The first intersection is pretty easy to find. I already have most of those lines drawn, so I just find the intersection and make a dot. Next I'll find the intersection of the curves about 1/4 in from the leading edge. I'll draw a vertical line here, translate the bottom of the line, then the top of the line out, and complete my reference rectangle to reveal the point where the two curves meet at that particular location. I ghost over the 2 points I have so far to see where on that line I feel least confident to make a decision. And I discover that I don't really know what the line is doing close to the front corner, so I repeat the process. About 1/8 of the way in, I draw a very tiny reference rectangle, and I identify the point where the two curves will meet. Now I need to find more intersection points for this back part of the curve. So about 3/4 of the way in, I project lines from each curve to create my reference rectangle and identify the point where both curves meet. And again I realize that I don't know what the curve does towards the end. so I draw another tiny reference rectangle to find my final point. With that, I switch my brush color back to black. The line that I draw needs to have a smooth transition through each point, so even as I draw this, I'm quickly visualizing reference rectangles to help guide my line. And if it looks like I'm uncertain, it's because as I'm connecting the dots, I'm seeing a subtle S-curve, which I wasn't expecting. At first I wonder if I've done something wrong, but I check the bottle, and sure enough, that top edge has a subtle S-curve to it. Now to find the correct curve on the other side of this bottle, I could do a few things. I could go through that whole process again. I could use the center plane of my bottle to reflect points from the line over, or I could extend the reference lines on top of the surface of the bottle and eyeball where each point needs to go. For the sake of time and cleanliness of my work, I opt for the latter, eyeball each point, and draw the curve. And that pretty much completes the volume of the main body. Now I'm going to move on to the neck of the bottle. I imagine a plane resting on the very top of the large cylinder I've drawn, and I look at how tall and deep the neck of the bottle is. I'd describe the basic volume of the neck as a cylinder, but the whole thing is skewed, and the top tapers a little. So I'll draw in a reference plane on which I'll draw the base of the cylinder for the neck. Based on my observations, I don't make the reference plane as deep as the main body of the spray bottle. It's also a little wider than it is deep, so the base of my cylinder will be more of an oval. It looks like the cylinder of the neck is about as tall as half of my initial cube, so I ghost over the front edge to get a feeling for how tall it is. Then I draw that same distance in for the frame of the neck. You might notice that I'm drawing a plane in the middle first before I build out the rest of my construction lines. I do this because it's much easier to get my dimensions right when I'm working with center lines first. Since my cylinder skews towards me, I give the center frame a little extra dimension in that direction. Now I'll build out the rest of the construction frame. I'll get another look at how the neck tapers and skews, draw in the frame for the top of my cylinder, place the oval, and connect the two ovals to complete the cylinder. Obviously the neck has some more subtle surfacing to it, so I'll look at it again to get a good reference. I'm not going to worry about the finger grips right now, but I am going to draw in the fillet where the front of the neck meets the body, and I'll draw the curve that connects the back of the neck and the body. Actually, that whole back surface of the neck curves a little, so I'll rotate the canvas and draw that in place. For the front of the neck, I've drawn the fillet on my center line, but if that fillet wraps all the way around, I wouldn't really see an edge there. I reference the bottle again to make sure I draw the fillet in correctly. Now I'm ready to draw in the cap. This might be the easiest volume in this whole exercise. It's literally just a cylinder. I visually measure its height against the neck, then I draw in the frame for the base of the cylinder, and draw the cylinder. With that very easy volume done, I must now tackle the most complicated volume, the sprayer head. Again, I'm going to work in centerline first before I build out the rest of my reference volumes. I find where the front and back of the sprayer head stop in reference to parts of the bottle I've already drawn, and I finish the top of the plane. I'll build out the rest of my reference volume for the sprayer head, and begin to lay in the tapered cylinder that will serve as the main body of the sprayer head. Later, I realize that the back end looks too low, and I'll revise my drawing. To help communicate the volume, I draw in a section line. This is also going to help me in visualizing where the complex cut will be placed on this surface. Referencing more points I've already drawn, I build the frame for the trigger. It's essentially a wedge shape, but to make room for the spray nozzle, I need to make sure to include the curved cut at the top. Here I build the frame for the nozzle, but at first I drew it too big, so I redo it at a more appropriate scale. Again, I'm imagining that minor axis driving from the right vanishing point through the center of my frame, and I draw the ellipse within the frame. The spray nozzle isn't quite a perfect circle. It's a little oblong and has surfaces that flatten out, but I'm not going to worry about that. Instead, I'll just include the small concentric circle in the center. I'll finish out the trigger. I give myself a section line down the center to help me mirror how the nozzle tapers and curves in at the bottom. The final volume I need to include is the mechanism that's visible behind the trigger. It's just two concentric cylinders, so I visualize the minor axis and draw several ellipses to create my volumes. Now all of my volumes are in place. I can go back and add details to enhance the surfaces I've created. I'll add ridges to my cap, going back over to draw lines very close to others to give them a sense of depth. Then I'll mark where the peaks of the finger indents are on the neck. And I'll draw those peaks wrapping around the neck. There's not really a simple trick to communicating organic surfaces like this in a line drawing, but to share my thought process, I try to draw a line wherever a surface is relatively parallel with my line of sight, or if a surface wraps away from me. Knowing how to build these kinds of volumes, and knowing how to draw them, comes with observation and practice. I couldn't draw these kinds of surfaces that well years ago, and years from now I'll build them and draw them even better than I am now. To draw the ridges on the back of the neck, I first block in where they'll end up. Then I draw the lines on the surface, and I'll give them visual depth by wrapping them around the neck of the bottle and darkening the bottom line. Finally, I want to communicate the radius going all around the bottle, so I'll bring the front edge up a little bit, round out the corners, and darken the contour lines around the bottle. Where the back surface of the main body disappears to meet up with the neck, I darken the line to show that the surface wraps away from me. I'll also add section lines to help communicate the volumes. And that's it. That's how I'd use basic volumes and construction lines to draw a spray bottle. I hope you found this helpful. Thanks for watching.